Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's webcast with Forethought Research. My name is Zina Pagan, ARF's Marketing Manager, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin learning about marketing science to drive brand growth, I will go over a few housekeeping items. For the best webcast experience, please keep yourself muted and your computer web camera turned off. Unfortunately, if you do turn on your cameras or unmute yourselves, I will have to disconnect your access to today's webcast as it will disrupt our webcast. The audio will be streamed. This means that you will be able to hear us through your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use a teleconference option, I will post the information in the chat box. Should you have any questions during the session, please type these to me and send them to me through the chat box, and I will read through them at the end of the session. The session will be recorded. If you would like to view the recorded event, it will be available on demand within 2 weeks from today. We are extending the conversation on social media. If you would like to join us, please use hashtag ARF Webcast. If you're interested in hosting a webcast of your own, please contact me at zena@thearf.org. That's ZENA@thearf.org. The ARF has a few events coming up. The ARF's Leadership Lab is back for our summer session. Our fourth class is tomorrow and will run through September 8th. The topic for this course will be centered around cross-platform measurement. Please check our website for further details on how to register. Also, tomorrow we will continue the ARF's Ground Truth experiments on how advertising works, focusing on mobile research quality. This event will be held at GfK's offices here in New York City. If you're interested in either one of these events or other ARF programs, please let me know and I will be happy to help you. And without further delay, I present to you our webcast for today.
Hello everyone, I'm Ken Roberts and I'm the President of Forethought. I have with me Leanne Rosamilia.
So hi everyone.
And Leanne is a Principal Consultant at Forethought. This is a conversation that we wanted to have for a while about farewelling the spiritual or intuitive marketer. We think that the greatest threat to the efficacy of marketing has been the intuitive marketer, who believes somehow that they have an instinctual basis of making decisions irrespective of data. And in fact, don't really even seek data that has any explanatory power. So we want to talk today about the application of marketing decision making, particularly in communication content, where the content is based on actual models that predict change in market share. The adoption of these methods have been pretty slow. It's kind of like an analogy of a slow train stopping at all stations. It seems that the only brands that are getting onto the express train are the challenger brands, the ones that have this major call to action and need to make a substantial lift in their market share or their margin. And they are the brands that we're seeing that are adopting the growth analytics, if you will, that enables them to understand what the drivers are of market share. So there's some plain facts. The plain facts are that we can predict change in market share by using models that are built on the constituents of consumers' decision making. That is the brand choice. So if this is so, and I'll show you some evidence of this in a moment, then why is the development of creatives such a lawless toss of the coin, as it is so often? I think that's the question we want to ask on the way through this discussion, and I hope that at the end of it you feel that we've answered it. Some of the impediments to our progress, some of the reasons why that we're on a stopping all stations train, is that there's a whole lot of proposed solutions out there that people tend to be either proposing or clinging onto. So we don't consider, for example, that neuromarketing, neuroscience is a solution. That is not a quantitative basis for predicting change in market share. it's not based on the content that actually is driving choice. For example, in neuromarketing, it's not even based on the discrete emotions. It's talking about approach versus avoidance. And in terms of a successful communications campaign, we need to know what are the discrete emotions leading to people's decision making. We're also being unnecessarily delayed by diversions like CEX or legacy metrics embedded into management reporting, which are outdated, underperforming and plain unhelpful. And if any chance of them actually predicting in-market success, we would contend was purely coincidental. So today is a discussion about how we can change that, how we can drive growth in our category for our brand. And we start with this paradigm, which is the growth made up of gain and retain. And we're particularly focused today on talking about gaining market share. So I just wanted to I'm going to put up a few bases of evidence for you to consider. The first one is, here's a whole lot of brands, a whole lot of categories where our market models are predicting, and I want to underscore this next word, change in market share. Not predicting some sort of straight line consumption, straight line sales, but actually predicting the change in market share. Generally, we find, by the way, that there is about a 2-month lag from what we are able to see in the survey data with what actually happens in market. So that tends to suggest that people recognise a change in value, a relative change in value, and it leads to their purchase behaviour sometime later. So I'll just go through these. Online savings, a 0.8 correlation with change in market share. Now, all of these that I'm about to read out are all based on third-party validated data. In some cases, take the domestic leisure aviation example, that's based on CASA data. So either independent data such as, say, Nielsen or regulated data like CASA. So retail deposits, 0.75. Mutual fund, this is based on independent data as well. This is based on APRA data, which is out of Australia. Prepaid mobile, postpaid mobile, instant coffee, breakfast cereal, discount department stores, and you're seeing that all of those numbers are very strong correlations, ranging from 0.75 to 0.87. The next slide is looking at 3 specific markets: supermarkets, Australian domestic aviation, and the discount department store market. And what we're showing is what was the predicted change in market share and what has been the actual change in market share. In supermarkets, at a category level, the correlation is 0.98. For domestic aviation, correlation 0.79, and for discount department stores, 0.93 at a market level. So it begs the question, if we can produce models that have constituents that are the drivers of consumption behaviour, is this feeding into how we're developing our creative? There's a professor at Melbourne Business School, Ujwal Kayandi, who recently made this comment. You need to be able to describe and diagnose what is happening, and you will then be able to predict behaviour. If you can predict, you can then start prescribing the actions management need to take. That's exactly what we're looking at here. We're looking at consistent ability to predict change in market share, being able to look under the bonnet to see what are the constituents that are enabling us to make these predictions, and then go ahead and build our creative around it. So I want to now mention for a moment the first constituent, which we want to address, is emotion. And Albert Einstein said it so well when he said the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is its faithful servant. This is very consistent with what Antonio Damasio would say today. We have created a society that honours the servant and has forgotten the gift. The gift that we want to focus on in this first part of the presentation is emotion. Understanding how do we measure emotion and how does it change our predictions of market share. We added emotion to our models in 2009, and we found about a 20% lift in variance explained by adding emotion into our predictive models. Kahneman has also been, of course, an influence to many people. And I think that his contribution has been immense, and it's certainly popularised the importance of emotion. But what we're finding is that a lot of organisations are starting to heavily lean on System 1, almost at the exclusion of System 2. And what our predictive models are showing is that the relative importance of emotion markedly changes depending on the category. So take prepaid mobile phones. 5% of the decision making is emotional. 95% of it is rational. Or at the other end of the extreme, if you like, is diapers. First-time mums. 70% emotion, mainly love and anxiety. So the System 2 continues to be important, and it continues to require us to understand what the rational reasons for purchase behaviour are, just as much as it is important to understand what the emotional reasons are for purchase behaviour. So when we think about System 1 and System 2, we think, the point that Damasio makes is that we cannot decide without an emotion. And this point about System 1 and thinking fast is that it is completely effortless and it is non-conscious. And so must be our measurement. We can't ask people how we feel. And I know this is covering old ground for a lot of people that are already sold in the importance of emotion, but I am giving us a bit of a refresher. And then System 2, the effortful way of considering things, we've only got perhaps 5% of our brain activity is actually rational, and it's non-divisive. So we're easily distracted, and to be able to make decisions, we need to be pretty singular, and that's really important from a communications perspective, because the whole model of disruption in communication is really important. If people can't subdivide their attention because of the flimsy aspect of our intellectual processing, then we must disrupt in order to get someone to process into their long-term memory. So we talk about teaching people by disrupting them. So the vast majority, some estimate as high as 98% of emotions, do not become conscious. And the more you think, the greater the likelihood is that the response you give is just thoughts trying to make sense of feelings. So we all understand that the measurement of emotion is absolutely paramount in terms of it has to be precognitive. And the analogy that we use is that it's like looking at a puddle and trying to understand what the shape of the ice block was. That this non-conscious processing is this state of emotion that precedes to a state of feeling. And a feeling is an emotion coloured in by memory. And then sometimes, as I've said before, maybe between 2 and 5% of the time, a feeling progresses all the way to a conscious understanding of feeling. So when we think about brand choice, we know that brand is made up of our models show that brand is made up of constructs like value for money and the emotions. And Bradley Gale in his 1990s text had it right. We find constantly that value for money is the best predictor of change of market share from a rational perspective. And then there's emotions. And these are the 9 emotions that we measure. And notice that there are 4 positive emotions and 4 negative emotions. And surprise, the first one listed there, can both be positive or negative. But it's completely untouched by human hands. I mean, we use a method for measuring these precognitively, and we look at the sign to see whether surprise is actually a positive or negative emotion for this purchase, this category. But all in all, these sum to change in market share. And it's this model that we use that enable us to inform creative, to help the creative agencies to develop advertising that actually changes behaviour. I just wanted to show this is a piece of this is a bit of evidence that has been refereed in an A-grade academic journal, which I'll mention a little bit later. But if you have a look in the November-December 2015 Journal of Marketing Science, you'll find this exhibit in an article that I wrote, where we looked at the latency of how quickly people are using the scale. And what you can see is the orange line there is that the mode is less than 1 second and the mean is around 1 second. So we know that if the scale is being processed in under a second, that it's prior to people being able to cognitively process. And then the blue scale, the blue line that you see, that's actually the time taken for the rational responses for us to get an answer on. So the methodology we use, prophecy feelings, is at the intersection of a state of feeling and a state of feeling made conscious. And it's our strongly held contention that it's precognitive, or at least if it's not precognitive, it has minimum cognitive interference. And I just wanted to put up a slide to show you the relative importance of emotion. Now, I wouldn't go away saying that this is always going to be the case for your product in this category, but we find there's a whole lot of variations. But these are some of typically of the ones that we've found over the years, and you can see that, as I mentioned before, diapers are at the very top there, all the way across. That's about 70% emotional. So extraordinarily emotional, and you go down the scale or go down the y-axis there to have a look at different categories. So we distill all of this down to what we call the triple play. Make them feel, teach them that. And the triple play is, first of all, the implicit elicitation, which is the long-term encoding of brand to the emotion linked to the consumption situation. And we talk about choosing an emotion and using that emotion in your communications in perpetuity. It's unlike the rational part where you can have a reason to believe specifically tied to a campaign. With emotion, we strongly contend that such is the difficulty of creating the neural pathway to the occasion, from the occasion to the brand, that you should sit on one particular emotion and stick with that, as I said, in perpetuity. Then on the other side, we have the teach them that, which is explicit learning. It's got to be done in the current term. It's got to be disruptive, attention-holding, reason to believe. And we distill that into, as I said, this triple play of what is the brand emotion, what is the reason to believe, and what is the price position. And quite often we get brands pushing back to us saying, we're a quality brand, we don't do price. And our evidence that we show is that every brand needs to have a price proposition, and you might want to be considered to be premium, but you still need to be considered to be in market in terms of within a relevant range of price competitiveness. And so if you've ignored price, then you would do that at your peril. You will find that your communications isn't as particularly effective. And this doesn't mean, by the way, that you need to state an explicit price. On the contrary, we have many examples of clients that have communicated price competitiveness through inference. For example, by putting a large amount of food on a plate, for example. So if we have all this science, if we have the science of understanding what the rational driven reasons to believe are, and we have the science that helps us to measure what are the discrete, implicitly measured emotions, then we're ready to go. We have what the drivers are. We can build the creative. And, as researchers, we understand where the demarcation lies between gaining this understanding of what the drivers are and then taking our leave, handing it over to the creative agencies. But what we discover, what we observe all too often, is that there's a rational approach to planning for advertising. So, for example, the business planning and developing the budget. Then there's the account planning insight and moving into this creative brief for the big idea. We would strongly argue that these should be based on science. But instead, we see that this part of the process is actually lawless. Rather than being based on drivers arising out of predictive analytics, we see that this part is based on intuition and getting back to our spiritual marketers. We cannot see any justification for this not being based on actual drivers of market share. That the best creative is creative that is constrained. And the constraints that you should be giving the creative is what are the drivers of market share. So there's always safety in numbers, and we need to move to this lawful game of skill. Our rationale is that it will activate the reasons to believe, and we'll be able to understand what are the emotions that are driving consumption in this category. I think it's best to illustrate all of this by using some case studies, particularly some Forethought case studies from one from Australia and one from the US. First one I want to share with you is Stouffers. Stouffers is a leading brand in the frozen food category owned by Nestle, and this work was undertaken with JWT New York. What I want to illustrate to you here is in practice, when we get to communications, how do we use the knowledge of the drivers to actually build compelling content in communications? So the exact lesson here is how do we encode into the long-term memory the brand emotion that is linked to consumption behaviour or the consumption situation. Now, the consumption situation we're going to look at now is about centering the family around eating and the love that's associated with the mum putting the meal on the table and centering the family. So we're going to start this from first principles and look at the relative importance of the emotions in this category. Now, if you're seeing these kinds of webs for the first time, there's a lot of information to take in. First of all, you'll notice that there's a scale, and the scale ranges from -3 to +3. So if you just look at straight up on the vertical, -3 to +3. It's very faint, but at 0, you'll notice there's a circle around at the point of 0 where there's a slight red line. And that red line is calibration. So that's how folks were feeling before we showed them any stimulus. So that's ground zero, point 0. Then we have around the perimeter the emotions. On the right-hand side, we have the positive emotions. In this case, surprise has a positive coefficient of 12% standardised to 100. And then we have happiness, love, pride and contentment. Notice that contentment is not a driver in this category. Then we go around to the left-hand side, we see shame, anxiety, sadness and anger. We notice that the major driver in this category is love at 11%. Then we look at the actual brands. And we notice that there's 2 standout brands. The black line, which is Stouffers, and there's Marie Calendar, which is the green brand. Then we have a whole lot of other brands that are pretty well clustered. And what you're going to notice in a moment when we look at the category is that they reasonably approximate the frozen food category. So we've got 2 standout brands, Marie Calendar and Stouffers, that have a stronger positive elicitation associated with their brands. Now, these are based on market share. So it reasonably approximates the actual market. So for example, Stouffers might have 20% market share, so it has 20% customer ratings and 80% non-customer ratings in order to get this market depiction of the emotions. So what we have done, Nestle were not happy that they even though they were leading, they wanted to move themselves further into positive emotions. So So what we did is we tested 3 15-second vignettes. Now, you read these vignettes going down. What you'll notice is if you go across on the bottom slide, all 3 slides are the same. The end of the 15-second video were all the same, and that was a mum putting food on the table. But the first one on the far left was a meal made from scratch. The one in the middle was the mum taking the meal out of the out of the freezer. And then the one on the right was the takeout. So we showed each of those 15-second vignettes to different respondents. All respondents only got to see one vignette, and we measured the emotion associated with each of those vignettes. What we see is that the purple line approximated the category. That is, the ones that we saw before, those cluster of other brands were all around the frozen meal emotion. But the emotion that really stood out was the real meal. An amazingly compelling perspective of love, happiness, surprise and pride. And so the decision was made that Nestlé was not happy with being just above in a positive emotion. It wanted to move its brand all the way across to this kind of high level of love that was associated with a real meal. So the gain equation, talking about gain and retain and the way that Forethought addresses this, is to make them feel, we wanted to make them feel love around centering the family. And teach them that. Well, the rational drivers were still around hearty, satisfying and traditional. So this was our triple play, love and heartiness, and there was a price point as well. So this slide now is showing you where the brand, Stouffers brand, is the solid inner line. The dotted line is where it went to post the first campaign, which focused on real meals, and then I've just left in the original love line that shows where their aspirations are. So you can see that the creative agency were able to develop a concept, a communications concept, which actually moved the brand significantly towards where it wanted to be with the real meal. There's a trap here, by the way. There's a thing that we look at that it's kind of analogous to two magnets. If the two magnets are too far apart, they don't draw towards each other. So you can go ahead and make a highly emotional ad. However, if it doesn't approximate in some ways or relate to the brand, it won't drag the brand along. We've seen some evidence of tremendously emotional communication that hasn't moved brands, particularly in banking. So what I want to show you now is a spot. This is from last year, and this is a spot which is continuing a theme. What I want to then show you is you'll see the centering of family in the emotion. You'll also see the rational evidence about this being hearty in terms of seeing the cheese pull and so on, and the food. And then we'll have a look at the result.
As Katie puts her cell phone down for the first time all week, she realizes that Stouffers lasagna is topped with fresh cheese that browns beautifully. Fresh cheese and a touch of aged Parmesan is what gives us our irresistible flavor.
What?
When you start with the best blend of cheese, you get the best lasagna. Stouffers, made for you to love. Nestlé, good food, good life.
So going forward, where are we now? So the brand was that amber line, brown line underneath calibration. This is for multi-serve. We were looking at single serve before, but for multi-serve, that's where the Stouffers brand was. The dark line is the objective for the brand, which is the real meal objective. And then the green and pink lines are for the current campaigns that were run in 2014. And that just shows how over time, from 2011 to 2014, through consistent application, that brand has been able to move to being able to understand through the work that JWT's done to move to that emotion around love. Well, that's the Stouffers case study. I wanted to now introduce you to Leanne Rosamilia. Leanne is a principal consultant at Forethought, and Leanne is going to take us through a case study which has been the subject of quite a lot of academic scrutiny, and also was the recipient of the Gold Ogilvy in 2013 from the ARF. So why don't we hand over to Leanne Rosamilia.
Thank you, Ken. So what I would like to do now is share with you a case study of how one of our clients was able to markedly turn their brand around from the point where they were at the brink of closing their doors to the public to now being the preeminent brand in market. And the turning point for this organisation was fundamentally attributed to their effective creative. Okay, and that is because they understood what the rational and emotional drivers were for their category and their brand, and were able to effectively build their price, quality and emotion into their campaign. So this is the story of Kmart here in Australia. So Kmart is obviously a discount department store and has been a long-standing brand in market for over 50 years. Now this particular story is a little bit of an older one, but nonetheless it is a very, very powerful one, as it does show just the commercial impact that effective creative and campaigns can have for an organisation. Okay, so to paint the picture, if we cast our minds back to 2010, it was a period where Kmart was really struggling as a brand. They had sustained over 10 years of contractions in company profits. So this iconic brand was placed under dire pressure to perform by management. And the question was asked, should we close the business? But instead of closing the doors, the decision was made to reinvest in the organisation and make dramatic changes to the way in which they operated to fundamentally deliver increased value to their customers. So what they had done was undertake all of these physical changes. They edited their product range, so they really streamlined the amount of lines that they were carrying. They moved to full dollar price points. They removed the dump bins from the centre of the aisles, which made the stores feel a little bit cheaper. They ultimately cleaned up the stores. They transitioned away from high-low pricing and to EDLP, so everyday low pricing. And then they fundamentally lowered their prices as well, as they had expanded their sourcing throughout Asia. So all of these physical changes were applied throughout their stores. And then they opened their doors to the new and improved Kmart. And of course, expected an influx of customers and sales to rise and the commercial prospects of the business to change. But they waited and waited, and the sales never came. They were still serving the same amount of customers as they had been before, which, as you can imagine, is heartbreaking for management. And the reason is that the old perceptions of Kmart remained. So customers didn't really see Kmart to be dramatically different to what they were before. Okay? So after 2 years of flat sales, a new CMO was brought on board at Kmart, so Dion Workman, who had increased the focus on insights to inform what their brand strategy was going to be moving forward. And this is the period when Forethought was engaged. And we were ultimately engaged to shed light on how the market was making decisions so that we could ultimately sharpen the focus of management onto the areas that mattered most to consumers. Okay? So, what this research revealed was that the key reason to believe or quality position that customers were searching for was a store that I feel comfortable in. So customers were looking for the discount department stores that are able to deliver this environment where they felt like they could conduct worry-free shopping as they were living within their means. Okay, so this quality position or reason to believe was all around making mums in particular feel like they could undertake this worry-free shopping. So feel comfortable within their stores. So that was a key quality position. From an emotions perspective, what we saw was that there are a few key emotions that was influencing consumption behaviour in this category. 2 which were positive, being pride and contentment, and then one on the negative side there as well. So what we have here is the emotions web, which is what Ken spoke through earlier, where we have each of the 9 emotions on the outer. So what we have here are the 5 positive emotions to the right-hand side, the 4 negative emotions to the left-hand side, and the impact on behaviour written on the outer there. So when we overlay how the performance of how the brands were performing on these emotions, what we see is that Kmart was not actually successfully eliciting these positive emotions, and in particular pride. And we know this because I'll draw your attention to that red centre point there, which is what we call calibration. So what we do is we capture how people are feeling when they enter a survey, and any movement above or beneath that red point is a result of the brand or the result of the stimulus. Okay? So what we can see here is that Kmart was not able to make the market feel more of these positive emotions or increased levels of these positive emotions. And when we overlay that with the competitive performance of Big W, so their rival in this particular market, what you can see is that there is virtually no difference between the 2 brands. So effectively, the market sees them as emotional substitutes. So what this highlighted to Kmart was that there was significant opportunity for them to select an emotion and seek to build that emotion into the consumption occasion, but importantly, linking that emotion to the brand. So after a series of sessions, the decision was made to target relentlessly pride. And what we uncovered, what pride meant to the category, it ultimately resided in making people feel this sense of achievement through savings. So making people feel like they had achieved something and that, you know, they had made the right choice of shopping at Kmart. Okay? So based on the research, Kmart was now in a position where they had very clearly articulated what their triple play was going to be. So they wanted to make the market feel this sense of achievement, and then they wanted to teach the market that they could shop within their stores and feel comfortable, so living within their means and not breaking the household budget. And that is because they were delivering a consistently low prices every day. So using this framework, we then went on to validate the effectiveness of the 1,000 Mums campaign, which was developed by BWM, their creative agency, back in June 2011, and this is it.
On July 11, Kmart invited 1,000 mums to a store with no price tags. This is what happened.
I don't think you can get a microwave for a day.
No less than 75.
Oh, 45. Wow. Half of what I thought.
This one. Come on, just come on.
Yeah, they're nice.
I reckon they're 32.
Yeah, I reckon.
When you realise just how dramatically low they've dropped their prices, gee, it feels good. So would you like irresistibly low prices on everything, every day?
So when this campaign aired and when we sought to test the effectiveness of this campaign, what we saw is that it was extraordinarily effective at activating these positive emotions, but in particular pride, which was their targeted emotion they were seeking to elicit through this creative. So the pink result there is where the Kmart brand profile was from an emotions perspective prior to the execution, and then that grey line to the right-hand side is how the Kmart TVC made the market feel. So what you can see is that it had effectively increased the elicitation of all of these positive emotions, but particularly pride. Now, given the tit-for-tat nature of this category, their biggest competitor in Big W came out literally 6 days later with an equivalent creative that sought to target the rational price-based message that Kmart was going for. Okay, but what Big W didn't have was the lens into the emotion. They didn't know which emotion was important for the category, nor did they know how to best articulate or elicit that emotion implicitly. Okay, so this is the Big W equivalent that was released 6 days later.
Guess what? What? You get it for less. You get it for less.
You do the addition.
There's no competition. You get it for less.
You get it for less.
And here are we stress.
It isn't funny.
To run out of money.
So get it for less.
Get it for less. Get it for less. Living for less.
So how do you think, from an emotions perspective, that Big W ad performed? Well, what the research definitely showed is that it was not as effective as Kmart. In fact, it had the opposite effect. That creative made the market feel increased levels of sadness, shame, anxiety, and anger. So it was not effective at eliciting the positive emotions, which we know are important to decision making in this category. So overall, Kmart absolutely wins on activating the positive emotions, but particularly pride, which is what they were seeking to target. So very effective emotionally. And that was also true in communicating the rational messages. So what we have here is the competitive positioning of Kmart and Big W on consistently low prices every day. So the price pillar that they're seeking to target. And what we saw was that back in June 2011, Kmart was actually seen as having a significant deficit on price. So Big W was seen as the price-based leader in this particular market. But after 2 to 3 months of that campaign being on air, the perceptions of consumers changed, and Kmart all of a sudden was now seen as the market leader on price, was seen as the player in the market that was delivering the most competitive prices. So this campaign was extraordinarily effective at changing those price-based perceptions, and virtually, no, I wouldn't say overnight, but within a couple of months, very, very effective at doing that, and as a result, encouraging foot traffic to go through the doors. And I should also call out that Kmart has also been able to successfully maintain that price-based lead to Big W, the biggest rival. So very effective at changing those perceptions. And it also did change the perceptions on quality. So the quality driver they were seeking to target, which was a store I feel comfortable in, but it did take a longer amount of time in order to correct those perceptions. So what we have here is a value proposition matrix, which essentially plots all of the quality drivers based on their importance. So the higher up on this matrix, the more important it is to behaviour. And anything that falls to the left-hand side of that midpoint is an attribute or a driver that Kmart has a deficit on, and that their competitor Big W is leading on. Okay? So the further to the left, the bigger the deficit. So what we can see here is that back in June 2011, Kmart did have a deficit to Big W on store I feel comfortable in. But fast forward 12 months, and we see their performance move all the way to the right-hand side. So now the market actually sees Kmart as being the leader on delivering this store environment where they feel comfortable to shop in. Okay? So extraordinarily successful at activating the positive emotions, changing the price-based perceptions virtually overnight or within 2 months, and changing the quality perceptions over the longer term period. So the success of this campaign absolutely was highlighted in the research results, but importantly, it translated into the commercial success of the organisation. So what we saw was that on the back of this campaign over the June 2011 to December 2012 period, Kmart saw an increase in product sales by 25 million. They drew in 3 million new customers through their doors. They had an increase in EBIT by 5.8%, and they had an increase in earnings growth by 31.4%. So extraordinary commercial results for this organisation. Now remember that it had been 2 years as well since Kmart had undertaken all of those physical changes to the stores. So this uplift in performance was purely attributed to their creative. And the reason that it was so successful is that they understood and had clearly articulated what their triple play was. And the creative was anchored to activating the price, quality and emotions message. Okay? So This piece of work, this creative, has absolutely been recognised in multiple forums. So in 2013, we, in partnership with BWM, were the gold winners of the David Ogilvy Award, and we've also been published in the Journal of Marketing Science for the critical role that insights has played in inspiring this great advertising. So to conclude, our position is that there is enormous commercial upside in leveraging science and insights as an input into the creative process, but specifically informing the creative content. So what messages do we want to land, and what exactly do we want to make people feel, so that we can achieve that behavioural outcome that we're looking for. So with this, we will close with a formal presentation and open up to questions.
Thank you, Leanne. That was terrific. So thank you again, everyone, for listening in. I just want to recap that, the brands that are moving quickly at adopting the science are the ones that have aspirations that are particularly challenger brands, and that's what's going to move this along faster than anything else. The plain facts are that we can predict change in market share using models that are built on the constituents of consumer decision making, that is brand choice, and that communication shouldn't be lawless. It shouldn't be based on a toss of a coin. It should be based on what the actual rational and emotional drivers are of market share. Thank you, everyone. I'd love to take questions.
Hello, everyone. So I will be taking your questions now. You'll still have opportunity to submit your questions through the chat function. So please type those in. So Ken, are you there?
Yes, Zena, here I am.
All right. So first question, why do you see market share as the key outcome rather than, say, consumption or sales?
Well, it's a relative measure, and if we just took sales, the system could be increasing. Everyone might be gaining increased sales. So if we look at market share, it's a relative performance measure, and that's what we're expecting to do, to change the relative market share of our clients by investing in that triple play. The other thing is that some of our clients are not actually as interested in market share as they are in margin. So we can equally look at margin, and some clients are actually primarily interested in category growth because they're category captains. So I think of Hershey as an example, where they have 47% of the sugar market in the USA, and their primary focus is to grow the category. It does vary, but we like market share because it's far clearer that you're actually changing the relative performance of the brand.
Okay, next question. I'm anticipating how the creative agencies will react. How do you propose the data and creative interact?
Well, it's a great question. Historically, emotion is important. I think that creative agencies have been saying that for a good 20 years. I think that at last we have a lens for implicit measurement of discrete emotion. And so what we're finding is some agencies, well, there's variability, Zena, in the ability of different agencies to actually elicit emotion. We find that some agencies have been extraordinarily successful at being able to elicit discrete emotions. Other agencies have been slower, and they've really embraced the sort of coaching aspect. One of the things about measuring discrete emotions, whilst the measurement of discrete emotions is new, the actual academic literature about how to elicit the emotion and what are the behavioural outcomes is actually really deep. And so what we can do is we can coach the agencies along by referring to various findings in various academic articles and help them along the way.
Next question. The models you are referring to explain what is happening in market right now, but isn't advertising more future looking?
Yeah, precisely right. We can see the effect of in pre-testing of the likely market outcome. And the primary variable is media weight, but we can encourage from the pre-testing the client to invest more heavily in a creative that we can see is eliciting the emotion and is communicating the rational. The models tend to lag by about 2 to 3 months. So, you know, when we think about the validity of a methodology, we know that the highest level of validation is predictive validation. And we know from these models that they are predictive. And they tend to be about 2 to 3 months in advance. So what we're seeing in the survey data is mirrored in the market, usually about 2 to 3 months on, which is pretty handy because some of our clients have found themselves in a contractionary sort of environment where they've you know, from the survey data, and they've been able to alter that outcome by, you know, moving, you know, say more of their advertising to price, so that the, you know, the predicted outcome that we're seeing in the survey data doesn't actually eventuate. But these are over the horizon models, Zena.
Okay, so here I have one final question, unless someone else has anything during the Q&A for this one. Are you using facial recognition to measure emotion?
Yeah, look, facial coding is really promising for a subset of emotions, and they're not necessarily the emotions that are predicting behavioural change. So if I was, you know, ABC, and I wanted to understand the proportion of time in an episode of Family Guy, what the proportion of time people were smiling, then facial coding would be you know, a perfect solution. But you know, you saw from the 9 emotions that we measure that only a few of them, only a couple of them, are actually measurable through facial recognition or facial coding. So whilst we see facial coding as being promising for a narrow subset of aspirations, we don't see them as being particularly, well, we don't see them at all as being predictive of change in market share.
So one more question came in. What did you use to measure emotion?
So we're using, you can read our patent. We've got the patent is published in the US. It's metaphor based. We use avatars, and we have 9 primary metaphors that describe each of the discrete emotions. And so it's mobile based, and basically it's like Second Life. You come into the survey, you choose your gender, you choose your ethnicity, and then this gamified approach where we basically, you move your finger on your screen to show how you feel, and as you move your finger, the animated metaphor allows you to click on and show at what point you're feeling. And so it's really instantaneous, it's fun. You know, abandonment rate during this phase of the survey is pretty much 0.
Okay, that is all we've got for questions today. Ken, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to cover before we conclude?
Maybe, Zena, just to emphasise that everything that's been presented today has been published in peer-review, refereed A-grade academic journals, and you know, that's the way that Forethought has taken our approach. That we've been steady and slow in developing this methodology, but we've got terrific predictive power, and it's been you know, blind tested by peer-reviewed academics and published for anyone to have a look at. So, you know, it's been a great joy, Zena. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Oh, no, thank you. And thank you so much for featuring an ARF David Ogilvy Award winner within your presentation. And if anybody's interested about the Ogilvy Awards, please let me know. I'm happy to provide you with any information, as well as let you know when our deadlines are coming up for the 2017 program. If anybody has any questions after the webcast is done for Ken, please send those to me. I'm at zena@thearf.org, and I'd be happy to forward along any questions. Or if you'd like like to take the conversation offline. Thank you so much to Forethought Research for presenting their study with the ARF and sharing it with our members here that logged in today. And thank you everybody for joining us during your lunch break. At Forethought, I really do appreciate the fact that you guys woke up extra early this morning to be with us. So thank you, and see you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Dina.